This dresser was destined for the landfill when I rescued it. The particle board top was severely bubbled due to water damage, as well as the top edge. One drawer was completely non-functional due to a missing drawer slide support. The board that separates these two drawers was completely MIA, and it had deep, ugly carved doors that made it look dated. In this extreme makeover, you'll see how I transformed this ugly duckling of a dresser into a beautiful swan. Welcome to Furniture Flipping for Profit. The first step to bringing new life to this severely damaged dresser is to remove all of the knobs and hinges and then wash and rinse the entire dresser. The secret to filling in carving and drawer pulls is this product, Platinum Patch by DAP. I've tried a lot of different wood fillers, and this one is the absolute best. It goes on easily, dries to a very hard surface, and sands with ease. I can always get a perfectly smooth surface with this product, so the carving literally disappears. The first coat of wood filler is only to fill in the deepest parts of the carving. I let it dry overnight and then applied a second coat that completely covered the carving. Once again, let it dry thoroughly, preferably overnight. I then used an orbital sander with 150 to 220 grit sandpaper to sand it smooth. You'll note that I'm constantly feeling the edges to make certain the filled areas blend seamlessly with the wood. If there are any remaining divots or open areas that you can feel, then fill them in with more wood filler and sand it smooth when it's completely dry. Repeat this as needed until the surface shows no signs of the carving. Since I was replacing the drawer pulls, I filled in the holes from the prior drawer pulls with the same wood filler and sanded it smooth. The next thing I tackled was the water-damaged particle board top. Particle board is made by mixing wood chips, sawmill scraps, and sawdust with a synthetic resin or a glue-like binder, and then densely compacting it into sheets like plywood. Particle board is susceptible to expansion and discoloration from the absorption of moisture. When particle board gets wet, it expands and these permanent bubbles form. The water in chalk paint and a water-based primer can cause particle board to bleed through the paint and discolor it. I've seen this on 2 occasions when I sanded through the finish down to the particle board prior to painting or priming. That's why I always use an oil-based primer, a shellac-based primer, or just straight shellac to seal raw particle board before painting it. Some particle board is made with formaldehyde-based resins. As a result, it's important to wear a good quality respirator, not just a dust mask, when sanding particle board to minimize your exposure to the potentially toxic chemicals. I used a 5-inch orbit sander to easily and quickly smooth the top and get rid of all the particle board bubbles. You could sand it by hand, but it would take a long time. In the past, I've used a variety of sanders, and the 5-inch random orbit sander works best. So if you only buy one sander for furniture refinishing, this is the type I recommend. I started sanding with 60 grit sandpaper and slowly sanded the entire top. After a few minutes, I had removed the raised portion of each bubble, but there were clear lines around the location of where the bubble had been. It's important to keep sanding until the sanded area blends seamlessly into the unsanded areas. I switched to 240 grit sandpaper and went over the entire top again. This step is important to get a smooth final finish. The 240 grit sandpaper closes the pores of the particle board. When I ran my hand across the top, I was amazed how smooth it felt after I used the 240 grit sandpaper. Since the top was laminate, I then scuff sanded the remainder of the top. This was done to ensure that the primer would adhere properly to the surface. The edge of the dresser top was also damaged. It looked like it was separating into sheets like the pages of a book. I applied a generous amount of wood glue to each layer and securely clamped it. The next day I removed the clamps and sanded it so the edge matched the undamaged part. Wood filler was used to fill in a few voids, and when dry, I sanded it one last time. After I applied primer, the repaired area was indistinguishable from the undamaged part. All of the sawdust was removed with a damp cloth. I went over it 3 times to ensure that it was as dust-free as possible. I used a paint roller with a 1/4 inch microfiber roller cover to apply 2 coats of an oil-based primer to the entire dresser. To ensure a smooth final finish, I sanded the entire dresser after the primer was dry with 240 grit sandpaper just to remove any dust nubs that had settled on the surface. I used Rustoleum chalk paint on the top of this dresser. Since this paint tends to be a little thick, you'll see that I sprayed the surface of the dresser with a mist of water occasionally to thin it out. As a result, the paint goes on more smoothly with less brush strokes visible in the end. Whenever I feel the brush strokes start to drag a little, I spray more water on the surface. For added durability, I applied 4 to 5 coats of water-based polyurethane to the top of this dresser. I think the before and after pictures speak for themselves in showing how effective this paint technique was. So now I am so excited. I'm going to be using this beautiful seafoam green colored paint. And in preparation for that, I needed to dust off the entire dresser with a damp cloth or a tack cloth. So there's not going to be any added dust in my paint. This is the Behr paint that I'm using, the Behr chalk paint. I really like it. It works very well, goes on well. And the nice thing is you can choose from so many colors. All the Behr colors that you see at the Home Depot store, any of those can be made into chalk paint. And quite honestly, they can color match. So if you have a color that you want to have the chalk paint made into, just take the sample in and they can match that color. I really like this chalk paint. On this entire dresser, I used a 6-inch foam roller, and I really was pleased with the final result. It went on really fast. The paint went on very smoothly, and I didn't find that it used up an excessive amount of paint. I've heard people complain saying when you use a foam roller, it uses up too much paint. I didn't find that to be the fact. That's not what I found. When you use a brush, it takes a lot longer to apply it, and you do have the brush strokes, but this had minimal texture. In fact, I didn't even feel the need to sand this when it was dry. This is the back of the slide, the drawer slide, and you can see that little piece of plastic to the left, and here it is on the left as well. Those are broken. The pieces that are supposed to be there, the drawer track back plates, are broken. They weren't even present. I wish I could have glued them on. So this is the one that I purchased. You can see that it's got two little lips on either side of it, and those are supposed to extend beyond the piece of wood at the back of the dresser. I've drawn an error to it. It's supposed to sit there on the back edge with the back extending down. However, if you put it in that way, you can see on the right there, the slide itself sits too far back. The slide is supposed to be up even with the edge of the drawer, like I have it shown in this picture here. So what that meant was I needed to change the position of the drawer track back plate. I needed to bring it forward. And that's what this shows here. I actually have my finger stuck behind it to kind of determine how much room I needed in order to bring it forward. So what I did was I figured out the distance that I needed to fill in, and I found that it was about the width of two, believe it or not, 5-gallon paint stirrers that I had laying around. So that's what I have here is two 5-gallon paint stirrers. I have clamped them together, and then I put the back plate there. And now I have the slide inserted, and I'm going to measure it. I've already measured the distance on the dresser itself, and now I'm measuring to make certain that these two pieces of wood are going to fill in enough space. And yes, it's just right. I have the paint can stirrers clamped together, and I'm using a Ryobi miter saw to cut them in 2-inch segments. This is the glue that I used. It's Loctite 60-second glue, and I just glued these two little pieces together. And then I grabbed that little clamp, and I clamped them, and it only took about a minute or two until they were solid. Now, the flange, the little lip, was in the way. It needed to sit on the ledge. It couldn't extend behind it. So I used a saw and I cut off that little lip on one side. Then use the same 60-second glue to glue the back plate to those two pieces of wood that I just glued together. And that will allow me enough room to bring that slider in proper position. So now I'm testing to see if it's in the proper position, if it's going to be bringing it forward enough. And sure enough, you can see on the far right there that it brings it up to the proper position. So now I just have to use the same glue, the Loctite 60-second glue, and I'm going to glue it to the back board of the dresser as well as the bottom. I didn't show that part. I'm holding it in place, and it's rock solid once it's all glued in place. Now I'm slipping in the slider, and it fits perfectly. And now I'm using just a 3/8-inch crown stapler that I have by Ryobi. It's battery operated, and I'm just putting in one staple on each side to hold it in place. So I repeated the same process on the other side, and there it is. It's working fine. In preparation for glazing, I wanted to make certain that I didn't damage my beautiful paint job, so I just unrolled a roll of trash bags and I taped them underneath the dresser top so that that plastic would then protect the dresser paint. And it really worked well to do that. It certainly was very expensive. I used the cheapest ones I found, which was like, I don't know, $3 for 100. I used Rustoleum Smokey Glaze, and I am showing you here that I just shook it up really well, and then I stirred it really well. That's very important to make sure you get the solids from underneath. Now, I did this in fast motion because I think it's important that you see the entire technique people ask questions about all the time. So you can see I'm just putting it on, certainly not this quickly. I just put it on, and then it'll show you wiping it off. And I just used, that's actually an old t-shirt, but it should be a lint-free cloth. You can also use cheesecloth. I've heard that recommended as well. I just bunched it up. To me, the most difficult thing was keeping my line straight when I wiped it off. And you see, I didn't put actual glaze on the edges. I just used the leftover glaze from the rag that I was using. And it's just your preference how you put it on. I actually applied 2 coats. After this one dried, I let it dry for about an hour. Then I applied a second coat, and I didn't show that on video. But you could stop after 1 coat if you wanted. I just thought it looked better with 2 coats.
I've been lying here for too long. I don't know what else to do. I wanna get away from every little thing just to try to make it through. I've been thinking about my
I like to use polyurethane, and on this particular dresser, I use the satin finish. And if you've watched any of my videos, you've seen me use this before. I use car wash sponges that I get at Dollar Tree, and then I cut them into segments. They work really, really well, and I like them because you can apply the coat very evenly, and it goes on really fast.
trying to catch my breath. I've been trying.
So I'm using silver knobs on this dresser, and for the hinge, I wanted to make it silver. So I tried using Rub and Buff. This is the first time I used it on a hinge, and I'm showing you here. This is amazing stuff. I don't know how it works. It's a wax, they say, but it's just amazing. It just takes it from brass. It just turns it into silver. It's great stuff. It's beautiful. There was a piece of trim missing between the 2 drawers. I felt fortunate that I had a piece of trim, I believe it's pine, that was just the right thickness to fill in that space and the right width. So I used my miter saw and I cut it down after I, of course, measured the width. And then there are some little staples that are left in the cabinet itself from the prior piece, so I had to pull those out. And when I put the piece up, I realized there was nothing for me to staple it to or to nail it to. So I cut a piece of the same wood and I made a little brace to go behind the larger trim piece that I just cut. And then I used a brad nailer and I nailed them together. And there you can see me slipping it into place in the dresser. And I just used a little clamp to hold it in place. Grabbed my brad nailer and nailed both sides. This was indeed a good project piece because once I got the drawers installed, I saw that they were not level. You can see on the left side, the gap between the drawers is wider than on the right side. So I got a little paint stir stick, cut it down to about 3/4 of an inch, tucked it underneath the slide, and glued it in place. The last thing I needed to do with this trim piece was to fix the gap between the trim piece and the dresser itself. I cut it a teensy bit short. So I filled the area with wood filler, then primed, painted, and sealed it. As we look at the before and after photos, I'm certain you'll agree with me that this was indeed an extreme makeover. To see another even more dramatic makeover with very innovative styling, click on the link at the end of this video.